I haven't said anything about myself. I'm the Deputy Director of the Forestry Department. My name is Ewald Rammelsteiner. I just recently rejoined the Forestry Department, so I have brought a couple of colleagues from the department to help me in specifying what they are doing. The intention that we had today is simply to, as an objective of that meeting, is simply to get to know you a little better, what the Tech4Effect does, and see who are the faces behind that consortium. It's a very relevant consortium for us because we have a new Director General who puts quite a bit of an emphasis on digital innovation and technology, so that's interesting. And we also have not only a Director General, but also a strategic development framework of the governments of the planet that push not only for sustainability, but also really for productivity, if you want. And that, I think, is quite relevant for what you're doing. And that puts the frame for us in terms of what we're interested in, what you are doing. And maybe you come here also to learn a little bit more of what we are doing. So we have a short presentation of what FAO does. We invited a few colleagues to say a bit more specifics on what they are doing. Also, in a way, as an opportunity for them to know you and to see who is interested in what, and to allow you to bilaterally follow up with wherever you pick your interest, and you see some potential for some further discussions or whatever you do. I leave that to you. So it's a good way of connecting those people that see that there is an interest to connect. We have 1.5 hours, I think, and if that's okay, I don't know, if you want to sit up here for the presentations. Some of us that give the presentation, that would allow colleagues, as they are connected virtually, to see your face in addition to seeing the presentation. We have one, obviously. Patrice, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you here. There might be others who have joined that are in the background. Patrice is our sub-regional forestry officer in the Dakar office in Senegal, responsible for Western Africa. We might or might not have a slide that shows you where we have sub-regional and regional offices a little later, once the floor is back with us. But before, I would give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move up here, I guess. Maybe I can stand. Perfect. Thank you very much for inviting us. It's very nice of you to take the time and to invite that many colleagues to come and have a dialogue with us. I think what we will try to do is explain, or what I will try to do is explain a little bit in general about the project, and then we are very much looking forward to hearing a bit more about what you do, and then hopefully we can have some dialogue. That was our intention and our hope with this meeting, so I hope we can do that. So Tech4Effect, our knowledge and technologies for effective wood procurement, is our project. We are funded by the Horizon 2020 program and BBI joint undertaking. We have 20 partners in 9 countries. The main partners are in Europe, but we have, during the project, had interest from partners outside of Europe, that being South Africa and Australia. So they have been joined the consortium during the project, and I think it's a very positive development for us that we get a broader scope than only Europe. We have a budget of about 5 million euros over 4 years, and we started in 2016, so we're now in the final year of our project and are starting to have quite a lot of interesting results that we can discuss once we see what is of common interest. My name is Rasmus Astrup. I have the fortunate honor of being the coordinator for our projects. So our consortium consists of research organizations and universities. as you can see, from Norway, Austria, Italy, Copenhagen, Denmark. And then we have the EFI, which of course covers all of Europe. Then we have University of Germany, Research Institution from Finland, and then we have Stellenbosch University and the University of Sunshine Coast from Australia. At the same time, we also have forest owners associations and forest contractors associations involved in the consortium. 2 state forests from Austria and Norway, and then we have some SMEs and machine manufacturers, both very large companies such as Ponce, but also smaller companies such as Ebensoft, which is a small software company. So basically, why are we doing Tech4Effect? We have the fundamental belief that the bioeconomy needs growing amounts of biomass. We have to supply that in a profitable and sustainable way at the same time. And what we do focus is on the process of harvesting or procurement of that resource. And the main reason is that harvesting is the main or most expensive and fuel intensive part of forest management. It's also the one where we see the most accidents in terms of labor. And it's potentially the way we see where we can have the highest efficiency gains in the short term. What we believe is that increased efficiency in forest management will improve the overall environmental and socio-economic performance of the full value chain. And that's our goal, to try to see if we can manage that. So our objective, what you see here, is basically the development of cubic meters per man day in, this is from Sweden, and what you see that there historically has been a tremendous development in the productivity per man day. The question is, of course, how that development will continue and how we can get that development to continue further. What we do believe in Tech4Effect, that a lot of the gains in efficiency that we'll see over the coming years will come from digitally driven processes, not so much from mechanical improvements, but more from better use of data, better processes, and optimization of processes that are involved in forest management. So basically, we hope to deliver some of the innovations that can lead to the increased productivity in a sustainable way. So our approach is that we try to build something we call an efficiency portal, which is basically a way to collect data, share data between different actors to enable better use of the data that's already collected during operations, both mainly automatically from machines, but also manually from operations. Today, a lot of data is collected by different parts of forest management. Machines today already collect an enormous amount of data, but in large parts of the world that data is not used for anything. One of the main challenges is that it's not structured. There's no systems for using it. And you know, data, as long as it's unstructured data, is not really valuable. It has to be made structured and has to be made into information and decision support. So that's our fundamental idea. Also, one thing that we think is a relatively new thing and interesting thing is this concept of interactive benchmarking, which basically gives both an individual operator, but also a group of operators or a company a possibility to benchmark themselves to see how they actually can improve their own performance compared to other actors in the sector. So what we do in Tech4Effect is that we call this efficiency portal, we branded as SilviSmart, which basically is a system where we automatically capture data from different devices in machines or smart phones. We send them into a global database. We then have national portals implemented for several countries in the project and potentially more. That then gives out analysis and reports. One of the key aspects of CivilSmart is this with who owns what data and who needs what information. Because one of the key things about information and digitalization is who should have access to what information, who owns what information. And really, when we deal with forestry, there are many actors that should see different information. There's a forest owner that needs to know something about their forest. There's a contractor that needs to know something about their machines and their performance. But it's not necessarily the same information, and I don't want to share all the information, because the contractor may not want to share their diesel consumption with the forest owner, because they look at that as internal business intelligence. So there's a clear need for trying to divide up who gets access to what information, and that's what we try to do in CivilSmart. I think that's one of the main, what can we say, realizations that we came through this project, that this for digitalization really to work in the forest sector, it's very important that we deal with these things about who has access to what information and how do they get efficiently access to that. What we've done is we try to make a system that divides the information into different categories, that being performance, forest information, environmental information. And then depending on what type of information that is being captured, then different people have access to the different types of information as agreed to in data agreements. But we don't only work with the digital things, we also work with promoting more efficient silvicultural practices that can increase growth rates. So we have had case studies in different areas. We try to identify possibilities for where it is mechanization can take place. You know, mechanization is not only increasing the efficiency, but it's also strongly reducing the amount of accidents that you have in the sector. And we know that something like forest harvesting, when it's done manually, is a very dangerous undertaking. And having more and more mechanization does strongly reduce the amount of accidents in the sector. But also try to develop better business processes and look at what digital tools there actually are that can improve the processes throughout the production chain. In terms of technical enhancement of operations, we focused a lot on things that try to reduce increase efficiency, but also reduce environmental impacts. So we have a lot of environmental impacts in both steep terrain, but also in flat terrain in terms of trafficability. So we worked a lot with these winch-assisted systems, both in steep terrain and flat terrain, to see if we can reduce the environmental impacts of machines. But also trying to get the information from these operations into the CivilSmart. And finally, of course, it's important for us that we try to reduce the fuel consumption of machines. And here from Italy, there's been nice work looking at how we can use these stop-start functions to reduce fuel consumptions of machines. Good. The other thing is that we see an enormous amount of data out there in terms of remote sensing, and I know you also work a lot with remote sensing products here at FAO to guide decision support around the world. So we have also worked a lot with using the open source data that's there, that being LiDAR data or satellite data, to try to make decision support tools. Here especially forest operations map that can support the environmental and efficient operations throughout Europe. Then we also compared different types of machines to see how we can actually reduce the environmental impact in combination with the digital tools. And not the least, how we can actually quantify the environmental impacts that we have. That is for sustainability assessments or for certifications, we need to be able to assess and quantify our environmental impacts to be able to document sustainability. We believe that it's very important for the forestry sector to be able to document sustainability in a very efficient and transparent way. Finally, what we try to do is, in the end of the project, which we are getting near to now, is to try to integrate this through a large-scale European value chain study to see what type of socioeconomic impacts will all of the innovations that we've done in terms of technology, digitalization, have on the European forest sector. We don't have the results yet, so you'll have to wait 10 months, but then hopefully we will know. It's EFI leading the work of integration across all of Europe to evaluate the effects, both on greenhouse gas emissions, but also on environmental impacts, employment and occupational safety, and not least cost and benefit to all those parameters. Yes. So that was a brief introduction to Tech4Effect. So thank you very much, and again, thank you for having us. We don't have a specific one on syllogism. I have one if you need it, if you want it. I have one we can take, but I thought, for now, I thought we should have an overall general introduction. I do have a presentation more if you want, but I think...
Okay, I would call colleagues that are interested just after the other introductions to request the presentation as you need. If there are no immediate questions, we will give a short overview of FAO's work, and then we could start the question and answer session. Is there any question that you would have from FAO colleagues on the presentation? Just for those questions that you need to understand a few things better, the rest would be then in the Q&A. Marco, please.
Well, I was curious about this work you're doing to improve access by extending the quality and quantity of the road network to access the forest resources. Whether you have received any feedback, let's say, from those conservation-minded people that I think say that accessing resources actually is not such a good thing. So I don't know if there has been a dialogue, you know, with the conservation community about that.
I do have.
Yeah, let's focus on the questions on the understanding. If there is anything unclear that was said, we can then have enough time for discussion thereafter. Yeah. Maybe that's okay.
No, thank you for the question. Yes, it's a good question about who actually wants access to the forest resource. We are not actually working on trying to necessarily extend the forest network to new areas or extend it in that way, but we're trying to construct it better so it actually lasts longer and has less environmental impact in the construction of it. But I'm sure Boku, who has been leading that work, can answer more details about that in I don't know if you want to do it now or we should take that in
yeah. Good.
Yeah, my name is Gernot Erber. I'm working for Boku University in Vienna. So, and the main idea behind this approach was not in building much more forest roads, but keeping the ones we have in better condition, which also means that maybe not having heavy loads on the roads during periods of very low forest road bearing capacity, because this means we have to invest a lot again into reconstructing these roads. And so seeing more or less this trade-off between maybe closing the roads for some days instead of going on them with heavy loads and investing a lot. So this, and what we also developed was quite a quick approach in how to assess the forest road standard, and then if this, for which transport technology this works, and also to assess the maintenance condition, and then to see quite early and to check very fast for a large forest road system how much maintenance is required, and to give an estimation on that for planning. So I hope this answers your question. Otherwise, we can deal with the questions afterwards.
Thank you.
I had just one question. Mine is better for the Q&A, but it's really a question, you know, there's the whole different scales of forest enterprises from small, medium to large. And I wondered to what extent you've looked at the range of needs. Each one of these scales has different needs in terms of technologies and approaches. And I wondered to what extent you've been looking at that sort of size of the enterprise question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's interesting because in the project we actually had interactions with some of the biggest global forest companies in South Africa. Mundi and Sappi are looking into use of this efficiency portal, while in a lot of the Nordic countries, the people who have been engaged in the use of this are contractors with maybe one machine. And really the system has different, it can be used by anybody, and I think they get very different values of it, but they have very different needs as well. So we try to engage in getting inputs on what it is the different actors need. Yeah.
Patrice, is there any question from you, maybe? No. Both questions, I think, were very much to the point of things that we are used to see in developing countries, and the discussions that we have there. And it would be nice to have an average picture of a forest road somewhere in Western Africa, which looks a bit different, and sort of the quality of improving the quality of those roads is certainly also important. It's a big issue. It seems I shouldn't have started the presentation or stopped the discussion session before this is on, but I think we are there. Here we are. Again, welcome to FAO. It's just, there are 2 or 3 slides that are just to show you that the forestry department is not the only department in the house. FAO has practically every country on the planet as a member. Not every UN organization has that. Actually, FAO is the biggest specialized agency of the UN. So it's a fairly big organization with country offices in around 130 countries, or project offices. That's, I think, is included in there. We have around 10,000 plus people. It always varies a little bit because this is the number with all the consultants that work for us in many of the locations. About a third is here at headquarters. And we have roughly, let's say, 1 billion per year, of which more than half, or let's say less than half, is our standard budget. A larger part, more than 60%, here it's 61%, is projects. So we run in a similar way as many of your organizations. We work very much with projects that are funded, where funding is given for us to work on a specific topic. Just to give you a rough overview on the size of FAO and on our strategic priorities. We have shifted from a sectoral approach in 2012 to an issue-based or a results-based approach around currently 5 strategic objectives, where all of the work of the Forestry Department fits. We work as Forestry Department to some extent on helping eliminate hunger, food insecurity and malnutrition. There is quite a big link, not only food from forest, like wild meat or non-wood forest products, but also energy that is used to cook food. A lot of wood energy is used in the planet to do that, especially in Africa. The second, where we have a very large portfolio of work of the Forestry Department, is the sustainability work that includes the productivity, which has been touched, and sustainability in the broader context. There is quite a bit of work also of the Forestry Department on reducing rural poverty, providing jobs, income for families. We work quite a bit on inclusive and efficient agricultural and food systems. That's the area of work where we work with bioeconomies, wood and non-wood forest products, value chains, and trade. And then the last one is the work of FAO on resilience of livelihoods to threats and crises. We have an entity that deals with emergency support, but also prevention of something like an emergency ever happening. There is a disaster risk reduction framework which we work quite a bit with quite many countries. So this is both prevention and protection, resilience enhancement, and an emergency response function that we have. Also here we have quite a few areas where we work that includes fire management and fire monitoring, and flood control, and quite a few other things as well. That's the overall setup. And the last slide on the overall setup is the way of how we usually work and interact. We are members organizations, so the countries are the bosses of what we do. It's more like an association where you have members that tell you and that approve your work planning and that approve how you work. But essentially it's around 5 different ways how we interact. The one is putting information within reach. We do a lot of knowledge sharing, knowledge gathering, and knowledge dissemination. Capacity development in terms of trainings, working with counterparts on the jobs at all levels, from government at central headquarters to the field. Quite a bit of policy support, very strategic. We have many dialogue for us at very different levels from the globe. We are very active in the UNFCCC, CBD, UNFF, and any other UN ... type of engagement, from New York to the sort of the implementation at country and sub-country levels. Yeah, dense networks like you have for researchers. There are dense networks on all of these topics amongst countries, and then sharing know-how, skills, and expertise. That's a nice example of sort of the sharing with research community and sort of company and practitioner communities with FAO, and I very much like it. To the Forestry Department, this is one of fairly many departments. I think we have around 25 departments. Forestry is not the biggest, but certainly also not the smallest, and has, I believe I have to say that, but it's also true, one of the ones where colleagues recognize the technical strength of the department, and I believe that's nice, because we also see that reflects over to the crop and livestock and fisheries people with which we tend to work a bit and quite a bit more, and that is because of this. That's the global agenda that most of the governments on the planet currently care for when it comes to forests. One is, and you have, as you follow the news, none of this will be very true. For us, these are the lead issues maybe that we have on our policy agenda. The halting deforestation, degradation has become very pertinent again, partly and largely through the climate change, which has, in a way, pushed through the resistance of dealing with this more directly. Now I think the urgency is clearly there, and much better recognized, and that is sometimes a lot of political work to make that happen. The figures, I think, you don't, you know very well yourself, but that also links to the question on how are you dealing with constructing more roads. That was hitting on the halting deforestation and degradation issue that we have in many countries. What we clearly also have a strong role that puts us a bit in a let's say, interesting position with the agriculture, crop, livestock, fisheries departments, is that they are really focusing, and they do a very good job of helping countries feeding people. We have 821 million people on the planet that do not have food every day. That's a tragedy. Many people here in the House work to address that. And some of what is happening sometimes is a tragedy for the forestry department, because they are not efficiently using the resources, sometimes destroy them for long-term, for short-term gains. So we are really, we are having a fairly strong focus on productivity, and it's great to have this type of work here also reflected by your consortium. We all really see that improving productivity is very important, especially also in agriculture, to help interlink better with forests and maintain forests in a way also means improving productivity jointly with farmers that have trees or have forests, or corporations that work with agriculture and forests. So there is a strong link. The forest dependency figures are always a bit dubious, because I would challenge any Finn here in the room to say they do not want to be dependent on forests. I think it's a very nice thing. If you walk out into the forest and you enjoy the landscape and heat your house with wood, I believe that's quite a nice thing to do. In developing countries, it's seen in a different way. It's seen as a subsistence necessity rather than a pleasure of life. Quite a few of the forestry department staff, and some of them are here today, are working on this repositioning of a bioeconomy based lifestyles that are environmentally acceptable. Driven partly by the climate change, but also increasingly by the biodiversity agendas on the planet, we are working a lot on restoration of forests, and that will continue. There is a decade of ecosystem restoration coming up. Also here the question very often, a couple of years or decades later, is how do you use the restored landscapes better in an integrated way where you have trees and other ways of making a living. That's partly because of the large percentage of biodiversity that you find in forests. Water and soil shouldn't be forgotten, but it's driven mostly by climate change agenda currently. We have oriented, like practically all UN organizations, very much along the SDGs. They are a good common framework wherever you go, whomever you talk with that has sort of broader exposure to things. You don't need to start with zero. You refer to the SDGs and you get a joint reference frame. I don't know how much you do in your organizations. We work very closely with some of the Scandinavian universities to work with developing countries on the university capacity building on integrating SDGs in the university systems or research systems, something that is quite interesting for us, possibly to also enhance collaboration with your organizations. This is a map that just shows the field projects. The field projects are those that are country specific. We have many regional or global projects that work in many of those countries that are not necessarily shown here. Red Plus is one of them. And certainly the Global Forest Resources Assessment works with every country on the planet. So that's a bit misleading, but that's a map from 2016-17 where we have country-specific projects that are country-specifically funded. And yes, as said, we have a fairly high number of projects that's in the multiple of thousands as FAO, and in the multiple of hundreds for the Forestry Department. The Forestry Department, and that might be a bit difficult to read, there is a bigger one. We have had 3 divisions, then we have had 2 divisions. Currently we have 1 division led by an ADG, that is the sort of, not the root But the first one, so we have an ADG, we have a director, and then we have teams that are organized in clusters, and I have the pleasure to have several colleagues here in the room that represent those teams, and they are doing all the work, and this is your best sort of interaction points. We have one that deals with, so these are the teams in those clusters. Those clusters should just help us organize, because a lot of things then go together around a couple of topics. There are a few where we have colleagues here in the room. These are now in red, and they will say a few things that hopefully are more interesting for you. There are a few where we thought maybe they are not directly related currently to the work of Tech4Effect, but they might be quite relevant for the future, or you might be interested in this. Just let us know. The one is to start from the right-hand side. The RED program, RED Plus program, does a lot of monitoring and helping countries to support RED Plus strategy development, baseline establishment for the emissions of CO2. They are strong. This is a strong effort of establishing this, but this group is moving to support countries more on from the preparation phase of RED to the implementation phase of RED. And we have colleagues here that know quite a lot on this, so if there is any question, let me know. We have somebody here to give a short introduction on the National Forest Monitoring. Moving over to the left is the Forest and Farm Facility and Social Forestry. We have the leader of the Social Forestry here. There is no specific slide because it wasn't totally clear of how the Tech4Effect could link, but I'm sure you have many links, Andrew, then to maybe have in the Q&A. This is the group that deals with communities, and many communities deal with forests in some ways, so there might be some work. And the Forest and Farm Facility is working with a range of countries of strengthening producer organizations, managing and using the forests in a sustainable way. I believe also quite interesting, even if many of those communities or producer organizations are not necessarily at that stage where they use digital technology effectively or can use. Then moving further to the left, the Global Forest Resources Assessment. I guess many, if not all of you, have used and do use data of the Forest Resources Assessment. The next one should come out fairly early next year, in the first half of 2020. And we are all looking forward to that. There is a colleague here on the Forest Resource Management, because there's quite a few areas that might be of interest. We have teams that work a lot on climate change and resilience. And then further to the left, a team that deals with water and mountains. They are currently not really working on road infrastructure, so you might give them a hint that this will be relevant. It's certainly a tough topic and an interesting one. They are working quite a bit on resilience and the typical watershed management functions in addition to water. The other ones, we have colleagues here to say much more clever things than I can. Let's see how we started. I think we start to the right. I would ask colleagues to maybe briefly give a short overview. If we can keep it fairly short and relevant to the Tech4Effect, so that we have a bit of a time to discuss the many other things that we might want to discuss. Is the colleague here on NFMA? Oh, no, here you are.
Okay, so my name is Lauri Vesa. I present here National Forest Monitoring Team. And this National Forest Monitoring Team, we have three thematic areas, which is satellite land monitoring systems and development of tools for these purposes. We have a tools suite called Open Forest, which is an open source and free tools for these purposes. And then we have a cloud-based system for remote sensing data processing, which is called CPAL. And then we support the national forest inventories, currently 16 countries ongoing. And biggest country that is in the pipeline now is Indonesia. And then we support reporting of countries for UNFCCC, so that we have been given a majority of the submissions, we have given support for preparation of these reports. Then some of the new activities, initiatives is CPIT, which is a repository for getting data from countries and use it for global forest resource assessment reporting. And this is just started this month, this project. And then we have a Japanese-funded restoration project where we support countries to get the initiative approaches for monitoring the restoration activities in these places. And peatland monitoring project is also started this year, and biggest countries which we support are Congo Democratic Republic and then Indonesia for conservation and restoration of these peatland areas. Then I hand this over to Maria.
I remain sitting because I will be brief. FAO initially supported countries to fill the requirements for REDD+, and one of them was the monitoring system for all countries. So that was our main focus at the beginning, but gradually as countries are better prepared for REDD+, we are moving into supporting them to implement their strategies to reduce deforestation. And if you have seen any strategy of REDD+ of the countries, they have several topics, and it includes agriculture, it includes many aspects, but there's normally a one on reducing emissions from forest management. And this is where we thought it can be of interest to you. Countries are exploring ways to reduce their emissions in forest operations, and one of the actions is usually also the restoration part. So of your interest, probably of common interest, is how those forest operations for big companies or smallholders can have an impact on reduced emissions.
I was wondering if it's useful to share a bit more on CIPOL and what you're doing that might link to forest operations. Is there anything that comes to your mind? Just if you think it's useful.
Yeah, some words about these tools and IT tools that we are working on. We have started development of tools for data collection from the field and from remote sensing data some 8 years ago, and we have tools called Open Forest Collect Earth, which is a visual-based assessment tool that you can take sample-based assessments from multi-temporal images. Then we have, together with NASA, launched Open Forest Collect Online, which is a collaborative tool for doing the same work, so that we can have access to the repositories of Google and some also nowadays in some Planet Labs data for certain countries that we can collect data from high-resolution images. Then CIPOL is a platform that enables using power of supercomputers so that we can put big machines into work of analyzing and doing the processing work, so that we don't have to do it in our local workstation. And that is gained great access now that we have CIPOL registered as users in more than 130 countries now.
Thank you. CIPOL might be something that you could look into, because it's also meant at some point to be on an app. I think you're working on that, and that might be relevant for companies or others to have remote sensing data on your mobile phone for your property, basically. Let's see whether this goes further. Yes, Marco, that will be you. If there is anything specific that from the Tech4Effect you think you could point clearly, the sustainable wood value chains one is maybe relevant. Thank you.
Yeah, I can mention basically this is, so my name is Marco Boscolo. I work in this team. That is the kind of work we're doing on policy, institution, economics, and finance. There is one initiative I think might be interesting. Evald mentioned, it's called the Sustainable Wood for a Sustainable World. It is an initiative that was launched in 2018 and has the goal to enhance the contribution of sustainable wood value chains to climate mitigation and also to a number of SDGs. So, for example, climate mitigation not only to make more sustainable restoration and reducing deforestation activities, but also to explore the carbon storage in harvested wood products. In these initiatives, there are 4 main goals. One is to promote policy and advocacy. For example, the team is doing reviews in countries that have wood-first policies, so to promote the use of wood, for example, in construction. Related to this policy advocacy, I want to mention that in next month, there will be, as part of this forest communication network that Evald mentioned earlier, we're having a discussion on how to promote wood in terms of with the general public, because one of the issues that sometimes wood is associated with forest degradation and environmental degradation. So how to correct this misperception that in many parts of the world exists. Another goal is to promote capacity building. One is to promote markets and finance for sustainable wood products. We're doing a lot of work here on this. In April, we had an expert meeting with companies, with the financing sources, basically trying to link smallholders and their associations with bigger companies and with the sources of finance, primarily in developing countries. Right now, we have activities in Kenya and Uganda on this, and this issue of understanding the socioeconomic impacts of increasing sustainability and promoting this is also something very interesting for us. And the 4th objective is to better understand the contribution of wood products in the bioeconomy. I want to mention that December 10 and 11, there will be an expert meeting here in FAO to look how to expand the contribution of wood products in the bioeconomy. Maybe some of you might be interested in that. As Evald mentioned, this we're doing with partners. We're working with ITTO, C4, the World Bank, WWF, and CITES on this initiative. And if I can share the kind of things that for me would be especially interesting to follow up, one is the issue of benchmarking to understand really efficiency. This I would like to learn more, especially this data that you have mentioned. I would like to know if it's publicly accessible, who can access it. Also on the socioeconomic impacts of the kind of activities you're doing, I think that would be very useful. Thank you.
Sorry, so my name is Sven Walter. I'm leading the team on forest products and statistics. And when you see the slide in front, again, product and statistics. So let's start with the statistics. We provide a clearinghouse for data, and my colleague Avidas, who is sitting also here in the room, he is coordinating the forest products yearbook. So every year we provide updated data on trade and production of forest products. And the next one will come out in mid-December with data from this year. However, we also emphasize a lot to improve the availability of data, in particular when it comes to non-wood forest products and fuel wood. So there we do work on better data, better coding systems. We work with the customs organization to get new codes for relevant products. And we work with countries to improve the availability with the Statistics Office, National Statistics Office in particular, of course, in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. Comes to the promotion of viable value chains. Again, that includes all kinds of products, from non-wood forest products, firewood, other wood fuels, and for wood products. And finally, we are basically the portal to engage with the forest-based industries, and in FAO has one statutory body, which is the Advisory Committee on the Sustainable Forest-Based Industry, and that is an official body of FAO where the private sector meets and provides advice to FAO. And actually yesterday, Linda and I, we come back from Brussels, where we met with our constituency and discuss what are issues at stake for the private sector and how they see FAO supporting them in view of achieving the sustainable development goals. And issues we discussed in the last days was the issue of carbon storage and harvested wood products, which has something to do, what Marco said, on the perception of the forest industries and how it can contribute to mitigate and adapt to climate change. The whole issue of substitution is something which is extremely relevant, and where I think we are there, facilitator between the private sector, some universities, technical organizations, and also our member countries, and to see how this type of research and how this can be then applied and promoted at the country level. And so this is something which we will continue in the future to really engage with the private sector and work together to promote viable value chains.
From the FLEG program, is there somebody? Emmanuel, I think, was meant to join. If not, I say a few words. FLEG stands for Forest Law Enforcement, Governance and Trade. It's one of those multi-year initiatives that is, in this case, strongly funded by the EU to address illegal logging, a very important topic that really puts back everybody who wants to produce in a sustainable way in a disadvantage. So the EU has had strong policies and is continuing to enhance policies that try to address this illegal deforestation or degradation. A lot of support goes through FAO to countries to make the counterparts, both private sector and governments and everybody in between, sort of more in tune with this type of thinking and these type of practices. And that includes technical systems that they are now increasingly emphasizing to track and trace timber legality. And these partly could be interesting to see how this links to data that is collected through Silvismart or Tech4Effect type of systems. Again, in the same line of thinking as Sven and Marco have just said, creating a level playing field for sustainable products and trying to enhance the systems that bring them forward and to reduce deforestation that is illegal or, well, on the margins of being illegal. There are that's a couple of years of work in many of those countries, including Latin America, Africa, and Asia. In some of those, there is quite a bit of IT and digital technology that is used to log different, sort of, to have a system to track and trace, both with remote sensing and with applications like RFID and barcodes, etc., and have a tracking system along the transportation chains, starting from the harvesting to the different log yards, etc., yeah, so maybe there is an opportunity to follow up with colleagues. They obviously had to cancel at the last moment to join here, but possibly quite interesting to see how you approach Silvismart versus what they are doing, quite advanced in many of those countries in practice. Here are colleagues from the forest management team. There are a few. I don't know how you want to structure. I understand you have 2 slides. I hope you still can be short so that there is time for some discussion.
I will be very short. You could say I represent the forest management team. I think the name suggests what our main preoccupation is. We rest on, in principle, 3 legs. That's multiple use, sustainable forest management in various landscapes and conditions, and conservation and use of forest biodiversity. That would be wildlife and genetic resources. A special leg that is the forest-based solutions for urban challenges. We're engaged in a green wall of cities, you might say, which an initiative that is quite interesting and I would say cutting edge. Okay, can we go to the next? Some examples of what we do. We work with planted forest, and there we're engaged in the International Commission on Poplars and other fast-growing trees, sustaining people and the environment. It used to be the International Poplar Commission. It's gotten a fair number of members, I think 33, and they're set to meet in 2020. It says what they're doing. It comes as no surprise that it's taxonomy, use, policy, and outreach. We're engaged. Another product that you may be interested in is the Sustainable Forest Management Toolbox. It's a toolbox consisting of 44 modules where we guide to suitable tools to covering most aspects of sustainable forest management, all from harvesting, safety, down to wildlife management, operational monitoring, and so on. You might be interested in, given the nature of this group, you might be interested in forest technology. That's me. I'm the officer tasked with harvesting and forest technology. I'm mainly occupied with occupational safety and health. We've developed a couple of reference texts and we're changing to more bilateral work now. I'm also working with clearing after disasters and the forest better planning of societal reconstruction. We have a rather exciting publication in pipeline on that. I'll be happy to take questions afterwards. Two things that I would like to, that I see a potential to cooperate in. I often get the question, how many are annually killed in forest accidents? And my answer is, I don't know, probably many. We need to, that's not good enough. And I may approach some of you to develop a methodology to investigate, to be able to provide a better answer. I'm also very interested in child labor in forestry, something that occurs and that we can't turn a blind eye on. Okay, that's it.
Any? No? Okay. Yeah. I think we are through with what I wanted to show, just to say that we work quite a bit and increasingly with private sector partners. This is just a few names that you possibly know, but these are just the global names. We are working quite a lot on the regional and country levels with private sector, and we see this increasing just simply because it is the private sector that makes or does not make a change in practice, in reality. And that is what we need to move the needles on the SDGs to have an impact, which is what we are finally after. And I believe that's it. I assume several of you have in some parts, phases of your career been exposed to publications. We still produce many publications that hopefully are useful and databases that hopefully are useful for you as well. And yeah, that I believe is it for us. So, thank you. Changing seat, but not hats. We would have roughly 30 minutes now for an open discussion amongst us. The first one that I wanted to check whether there are any questions is Patrice. Is there anybody else online that we know of that might have questions? Yeah, okay. Yeah, he knew what we do in FAO, so he has switched off, obviously. Yeah, that leaves us we still record, so people will be able to log in if they are still in their beds, like in Latin America. So maybe we do use the microphone just to make sure we have fit, because the topics that you deal with, I believe, are relevant, and that is one of the things that I really like with your group. It's practical, on-the-ground type of work, which I believe is always very refreshing for many of us that work more in the fields and on practical issues, rather than on sort of general government policy discussions, which sometimes tend to be a bit more abstract. So floor is ours, both for the colleagues that kindly join from the forestry department to show what they are doing and ask questions, and for you, vice versa. Whoever takes the first one will certainly get an answer. Don't wait for too long, otherwise we might run out of time. Over to us.
Great, thank you. So for me, of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how is this work relevant to what we're doing in the day-to-day, especially in support to developing countries? So the questions I raised earlier, I was very interested to hear about this efficiency portal, this information on benchmarking, efficiency of operations. I would be curious to hear more. And in terms of the information, also how accessible it is, you know, to what degree it could be relevant to other countries. I understand South Africa is part of it, so that would be, I guess, my question. I understand you also work on the socioeconomic with EFI, but won't be available until some time from now. So I think that would be one question for me. Thank you.
If I could start just with the general principles of data accessibility and so forth. Our general principle is that, of course, the people that collect the data own the data. We don't own the data. They maintain ownership of their own data. The main idea with the benchmarking is that you can say yes to your data being used in benchmarking. That means everybody else who submits the data can be benchmarked against the others who have to be anonymized. So they have to be presented in groups of a minimum of, let's say, 10 people, where you can't identify the individuals because of privacy constraints. But the idea is that you should be able to use it that way. So if you supply data, you should be able to take advantage of other people's data to learn more about how you can improve your own performance. And I think Nils from University of Copenhagen can say more about the details of how benchmarking is thought to work, and maybe Michel can say a little bit afterwards about how the socioeconomic impacts and how we think about those things.
Good morning. It's really interesting to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'm work package leader of this benchmarking. And as part of the benchmarking, to answer the question, let's say the functionality of the benchmarking would be to use and explore the data, like Rasmus mentioned before, in a way that it allows let's say the owner of the machine, the operator himself, or whoever is the organizational unit looking at the data, to learn from their own performance. So compare themselves to their, let's say, their performance before. So for example, what have my use and consumption of fuel been before compared to what kind of performance I have in terms of producing wood products or harvesting products. So I can compare myself to my previous performance over time. And the main idea about benchmarking is to learn, right? It's about learning about how I can improve my own performance compared to what I've done before. But also the second facility is to compare myself to others, like Rasmus mentioned before. How am I doing compared to others? And usually we have been using KPIs like cubic meters per hour or fuel consumption per cubic meter or something like that. When we talk about doing real benchmarking in this project, we want to deal with the multidimensionality of production chain. So both that we have many different types of inputs, time, fuel consumption, different types of inputs that allows us to produce outputs. And when we talk about outputs, it's cubic meters of saw logs, it could be cubic meters of different types of forest products. So how is my performance in a multidimensional way? That's quite different compared to what normal benchmarking is doing. So I think we're doing a difference here. The other difference is that it allows the operator to look into different directions. How can I improve my fuel consumption? How should I perform compared to the best? And I think that kind of learning is important for improving and our performance. So I think there's this interactive element of benchmarking is quite unique, and we hope that it can be useful for learning and improving the production and the efficiency of this whole sector.
Hello, my name is Michel Den Herder from the European Forest Institute, and we're making of the Tech4Effect, so the suggestion innovations. We're making an assessment, and then we're looking at what if these innovations, if they're applied on a European scale, what will be the European-wide impacts. And about for the socio-economic aspects, we're looking at the employment effect, and also the occupational safety aspect is very important. For occupational safety, this increasing mechanization, that's a huge benefit for it's a huge safety improvement. But on the other hand, it also has it can have a decrease on the employment in the forest sector itself. But on the other hand, there's the bioeconomy and this use of digital tools. It's on the other hand also it creates a lot of employment effect. And by the use of these tools and mechanization, a lot of more forests what were previously not accessible, they could be now accessible. And then we're also looking at the use of digital tools, not for as a way to increase efficiency, but we're also looking at can it be a way to reach more forest owners? For example, young forest owners, they can be more easily reached by means of these new tools. But also, forest owners which live in cities so far away from the forest. Many forest owners, they don't live next to their forest anymore, like in the olden days. And then you also see now in some tools they add all kind of additional components that they can also be used as a way for spreading more information, like as a learning tool that forest owners can learn more about their forest through these new tools. So that's a very interesting aspect. Thank you.
If I may just add one thing, I think when we started out writing this proposal, we were thinking a little bit about how much people actually use with the benchmarking, how much people actually use running apps and all these things to try to improve their own performance. They have to compare themselves to their neighbor and the guy at work and how fast they run and how addicted they are to looking at these things. And then we thought maybe you could do the same when you produce forest products, and maybe it would increase production a lot. We know that there's a very large variability between individual operators and their own performance, how effective people are. So maybe the most important part for increasing efficiency is actually lifting some of the bottom part of the people that are for some reasons not not improving as efficient as they could. So that was at the outset of the project. We were thinking that way. We're not quite there yet, but we hope to. We still have 1 year, and we hope to get to some of that idea. Yeah, and also I would just like to highlight also with what you mentioned, but timber tracing. I think one of the very nice parts about Tech4Effect is that we have this combination of companies, research institution, and SMEs. And one of our partners from Austria, Lasbacher, they do provide most of the timber tracing technologies for Central Europe, and is a very interesting partner in our project. So I just wanted to highlight that we certainly have some interesting knowledge in relation to how you should mark and trace wood through the value chain.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Dirk Jäger. I'm with the University of Göttingen. And I was wondering, what we are experiencing in forest operations is a shift of working environment and conditions. It may be related to climate change, but we are having more precipitation now in the winter time. And so it's normally the logging time in the winter. And so it's becoming more and more difficult. And I was wondering whether you are also projecting environmental conditions in the future, so how they will impact forest operations, and whether there is some projection on that, and which we could use for our assumptions and developments, what we are projecting.
That is an interesting question indeed. Yeah. We do some projections, but possibly not as many as you want to see. What we have done is FAO corporate projections that do not really go down to forest operations implications, and and that is largely modeling with more or less accurate systems of modeling as they are in larger partial equilibrium models and the effects of climate change. We are exploring largely with remote sensing, but mostly in non-forest conditions about growing conditions, which at some point affect the conditions of how you harvest those things. But this is really largely crop. How do crop areas change with climate variability? And the third area where we do a bit of geographically explicit modeling in that case, is sort of the impact of climate change on the risk of disasters, and that has some effects on forests. But again, with impacts on logging operations, no, we don't. Yeah, in short, but it is an interesting area to look into. So maybe something to follow up with the colleagues that do that.
I see clearing after disaster as sort of a new frontier for us in forest technology, and whether they will increase in number or not. I've spent a fair bit of time looking at investigations of that, and yes, it seems from literature that severity is increasing, but maybe not the number. But I see a great potential in developing countries, and that's an enormous need to improve societal reconstruction, and that is response. Some of the work is not technical. It may be regional cooperation. I was recently engaged in the Bahamas of hiring a contractor to clear. Bahamas was turned upside down a couple of months ago, and the operation is simply so dangerous that they need harvesters. They don't want to send people in to do that, and I understand them. So I'll help locate some candidates. Then I have a feeling that countries with winters, this climate change issue is more important. My own country is known for its very long and very nasty winters, but the ground doesn't freeze as it used to, so we increasingly have to log when it's drying instead of frozen. And that we probably have a lot to learn from other European countries, but our work is more with developing countries where winter is not normally a very great issue.
I'm Jeff Campbell with the Forest and Farm Facility. I'm sorry, I was a little bit late. There's a lot of interest in farmer-producer organizations for more short-term weather forecasts. This is not such a big issue maybe in Northern Europe, etc., where you have pretty good access to that. But we haven't thought as much about the importance, even for smallholder tree growers, probably around heavy rains, etc., and scheduling when they're going to harvest and things like that. So it's possible that we could learn a little bit from the agricultural, they're using ICTs, so people get on their phone, how long is the next rain predicted to be for, and you don't go and, already schedule someone to come to harvest or to look at, your little sort yard or whatever you've got after harvesting. So it's interesting to think about how we might also look at the ag weather forecasting for tree growers or small community forest owners, etc.
As you have the microphone, we didn't say much about the Forest and Farm Facility in the introduction, as this is a group that does deal with small and big producers and the IT and logistics. Maybe you give a short overview of the Forest and Farm Facility.
Sure, and again, apologies, I wasn't able to come earlier. Well, we're a partnership with the IIED, the International Institute for Environment and Development, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and AgriCord. And as the name suggests, the Forest and Farm Facility, our primary purpose in life is to strengthen the capacity of producer organizations, which we're here calling forest and farm producer organizations. This includes everything from indigenous peoples managing territories to community forestry groups to agroforestry, tree farmers, and women's, and these small-scale enterprises for processing, maybe first level of processing, etc. So the idea is to build the capacity of these groups around both from the perspective of their ability to organize, govern themselves, access policy. Second, to develop their enterprises, and we're particularly interested in strengthening business incubation capacity within large producer organizations. What's been interesting is we work not only with forestry organizations, but increasingly with very large farmers organizations who have not thought much about forestry or about the impacts of forestry or about the huge benefits for them from tree growing. So that's been, they have a huge constituency, and in many countries right now they're the largest engine of any kind of restoration going on. And so Vietnam National Farmers Union, 1.5 million farmers have planted 3.5 million hectares, mostly acacia manchum, but of trees. And so, in Kenya, the small family forestry smallholders producers association of Kenya, and they now have 30,000 members. They're committing to at least 10% of their farms would be covered by trees, things like this. So there's a huge potential, and also really they're starting to generate a lot of more material. Ben has been helping us, to do this direct basic tree inventory, for instance, with the with these groups, and if they are organized, let's say at a district level, in Kenya again as an example, where you might have 3,000 or 5,000 members of the producer organization with 100% inventory, and some spatial analysis of what proportion of that landscape their footprint is on, this is already becoming interesting to timber buyers, because they know also when there could be scheduled harvests, what the volume might be, et cetera, et cetera. And for us, it's forestry 101, but very few smallholder farmers or even community forests so far in the global south actually have this inventory data. And we spend a lot of time with our big satellite stuff from up here, but we really need to fill in from below as well. So that's an example. Then, sorry, the third thing is helping them work on climate resilience, restoration, getting climate funding, and those sorts of things. And then the fourth thing, which we found very important because we're trying to work on inclusive value chains, is their provision of social and cultural services to their members. So for instance, for women's entrepreneurs, if you have childcare services, you can suddenly spend time in a processing activity, right? I mean, or if you have fire insurance, in Tanzania, the largest proportion of now planted forest is through the Smallholders Association, larger than industry or government. They can't individually afford fire insurance for their pine plantations, a big issue. So many things like that. How can we look to help aggregate people for market, for landscape resilience, for these kind of shared costs, and then to access finance. So that's, I guess, and we work in, now we have 9 core countries and about 7 partner countries around in each of the main, well, in Latin America, Africa, and Asia.
Hi, I'm Giovanna Olmo from NIBIO, the Norwegian Institute for Bioeconomy Research. I wanted to know if it was possible to have a short overview of the FAO activities in forestry under the European office that you have. I know that there are some projects in forestry under the regional offices for Europe, because I think it would be somewhat easier for us also to see ourselves cooperating. If I know that there is at the moment I'm residing in Kosovo for different reasons, and I'm in contact with your FAO representative there, and what you're doing there, trying to raise awareness against illegal logging could be also something. Thank you.
Especially for that question, we have flown in our colleague from Budapest.
Good morning. My name is Norbert Winkler-Ratoni. I was until recently in the Budapest office. I can update you right now what we have in terms of ongoing projects or recent. Let's start by topic. The main issues forest has at the moment. So we have forest based Abkhazia, Turkey, Belarus, Ukraine. Then we have a lot of issues related to forest inventory. Belarus, Ukraine, it's an issue, but we don't have currently something ongoing. I mean, it's in a pipeline stage. Then Moldova, Macedonia, Serbia, Armenia. So this is forest inventories, forest monitoring. Then we have now with the Green Climate Fund, things are moving. A lot of afforestation issues, large scale, basically landscape restoration. So it's not only on forestry, it's more integrated. Just last week, Kyrgyzstan, a huge Green Climate Fund project has been past approval stage with the Secretariat. It's about, on the one hand, forest afforestation, and on the other hand, grassland management, so pasture management. Similar in the pipeline in Armenia. The one component is forest afforestation, conversion of degraded forest in valuable forests, bring it back, and the combination with energy efficiency. How to improve, I mean, there's an incentive system to replace the old stoves, etc. So we have to think much more outreach to other sectors and also other partners to get things approved, and not only look on the forest as, on forestry as such. We have to reduce the pressure on the forest resources. What else have we got at the moment? I mean, we permanently get requests right now. I just heard about Albania. They want to do something on non-wood forest products, but again on afforestation. But everything centered around basically improve data availability, forest-based and invasive species are the main issues, and increasingly requests for forest fires. And this links also to what we were discussing about this. I didn't want to raise it, but now there's the opportunity. We have to think about reducing the fuel load in the forest because of the forest fire hazards, which leads to accessibility of the forest, and where we are certainly a bit in trouble with the conservation people. But what else have we got? Also, with the forest pests, within 2 years in Belarus, we lost 300,000 hectares. So on the one hand, we have large-scale events where we probably need more cooperation to bring the machinery in. So we think about, I mean, Belarus managed through a World Bank project, taking a loan, getting the machinery, but there might be certainly the opportunity for cross-border cooperation on these issues. And on the other hand, we have our whole planning system, and it's very nice if you say also, you mentioned closure of forest road. Reality is, if also, I'm from Austria originally, okay, so you're talking bad weather, you have a contractor with a machinery from Sweden, he couldn't care less what the weather is. He has to harvest within the 3 days what he's contracted for. So they are running the machinery times in 3 shifts around the clock. So environmental, there was also the benchmarking. I didn't hear anything about the damage, only about cost efficiency and cubic meters per hectare. Cubic meters per hectare. We have to look also, benchmarking would be about damages. What else comes to my mind? There are so many issues. I could continue for ages. Thank you.
Yeah, the bad news is it's 11:30, so we are about the end of the event. We have a few minutes, but I see the first people moving out, so maybe we wrap this up. Jeff, you want to say something? And thank you.
I just assume people know about Silvamed. No?
There has been no information on Silvamed at this stage, so if you want to say a few words.
No, I don't. I can't easily discuss it, but it's important to appreciate that, you know, we have a whole program through, and the Secretariat is here, so it's a lot of activities. The one thing I forgot to mention is, because of our linkage to this AgriCord and because of our funding from Finland, Sweden, etc., we have a lot of interaction with MTK from Finland, with the LRF in Sweden. So this is direct forest owners and small businesses, in some cases, going to the global south to work with their counterparts in those countries. So that's been a very useful exchange. And what they've generally found is how remarkably similar many of the issues are, even though the scale and everything is quite different. So that's been, I think, a good learning that, you know, small forest owners face similar issues in a way, and it's not as distinct north to south as people maybe in the past thought.
Is there any burning question that you have? Otherwise, we would conclude the short but sweet Q&A. I do have one question that is, usually at the end of a project or in the middle of a project, you start thinking about dissemination and possibly partnering to push for uptake of the results and maybe some events. So I was wondering if there is anything that planned that might be of interest to FAO.
We are, yes, we are developing our dissemination plan as these days. I think we are planning to have a final event in Brussels, which may be of interest to FAO, and certainly we're very happy to invite you if you would be interested in participating in such an event. But otherwise, we are very happy to collaborate on communication and dissemination activities, and can contact our RTDS, which are a dissemination partner. Yeah.
Good. So here we are. I hope you have learned a little bit about FAO. We certainly have learned quite a bit about your project. It seems very interesting in many respects. There is often a bit of a thinking that is needed after getting the information of, okay, how is this relevant for me, and how can we sort of learn either conceptually or in practice and link up. It might be quite useful maybe to have counterparts through which, to which to communicate. I'd be happy to, if there is any question that comes from your consortium as visitors, maybe Rasmus through you to just forward to us. We will connect to the people that are concerned. Also, Magnus, I think you have been instrumental, or Jonas, to helping set this up, and thank you very much for that. I believe that's all from me. I thank you again for the opportunity, and I hope you have a nice rest of the day in Rome. I understand some of you are already flying back, so enjoy the last hours, whatever time there is left on a Friday afternoon, and all the best for your project. Thank you again.